Eric Medlen never intended to change the world. He simply wanted to do what he loved, to race fast cars, to win championships, and to do it alongside his father. But on a single day in March 2007, everything changed, not just for one man, but for an entire sport. What happened at Gainesville Raceway would revolutionize drag racing safety forever, and the name Eric Medlen would become synonymous with the courage required to demand better, to build better, and to never stop fighting for the lives of those who dare to push the limits of speed. This is the story of the accident that revolutionized drag racing, and the legacy that emerged from tragedy. Eric John Medlen was born on August 13, 1973, in Oakdale, California, a small town in the agricultural heart of Stanislaus County. He grew up around his father's machine shop, surrounded by wrenches, steel, and the mechanical symphony of American ingenuity. From childhood, Eric learned that things could be built, understood, and, most importantly, improved. His early passions weren't confined to engines and transmissions. He was a champion calf roper in high school, an aspiring rodeo cowboy who dreamed of professional team roping. His mentor was Gerald Camarillo, a two-time PRCA world champion who saw in young Eric the makings of a competitor, someone willing to push himself to the edge, someone hungry for greatness. But destiny had other plans. When his parents divorced and his father moved to Arkansas to pursue his own racing career, Eric faced a crossroads. He wanted to follow his father, to race with him, to prove himself in the professional ranks. Yet opportunities didn't come easily for a young man from a small California town. For 8 years, Eric worked in the relative obscurity of the John Force racing crew, learning every detail of funny car engineering and preparation. He built custom motorcycles in his spare time, painted his own racing helmets, and studied mechanical engineering at Terra State Community College. He attended Frank Hawley's drag racing school multiple times, paying for it himself by selling off his beloved karts and the custom chopper motorcycle he had handcrafted. When Tony Pedregan departed John Force Racing at the end of 2003 to form a team with his brother Cruz, something unexpected happened. John Force, the most prolific winner in drag racing history, looked across the pit and saw something special in Eric Medlen. He offered the young man a drive in the Castrol Syntec Ford Mustang funny car. Eric's dream was finally becoming reality. Not just racing, but racing alongside his father as crew chief. "My dad was my hero growing up," Medlen said, "and I always dreamed that we'd wind up racing together. But I never dreamed that I'd be driving and he'd be the crew chief on the same car, especially at a place like John Force Racing." The 2004 NHRA season was Eric's launching point. In his rookie year, he was a top contender for the Road to the Future award, marking him as one of the brightest young talents in the sport. He claimed his first professional victory at Brainerd International Raceway in Minnesota, besting three-time former NHRA top fuel champion Gary Skelsey. In 2005, he won 3 times in a 4-race stretch, Seattle, Brainerd, and Memphis, and finished a career-best 4th in the Powerade Funny Car standings. The following year brought more victories at Sonoma and Richmond, another 4th-place points finish, and the confirmation that Eric Medlen had arrived as a force in professional drag racing. By March 2007, Eric had won 6 national events. He had 8 number 1 qualifiers. He had logged a 94-win, 65-loss record on the track. He was 33 years old, in his prime, and everything he had worked for seemed within reach. He had the talent, the machinery, the knowledge, and the family support that made champions. His fastest times had dropped to 4.6 seconds at speeds approaching 330 miles per hour. On the surface, the future looked limitless. Then came March 19, 2007. The morning was clear at Gainesville Raceway in Gainesville, Florida. This wasn't race day. It was a test session, one of hundreds that occur throughout the NHRA season. Test sessions are where teams push the envelope, exploring setup changes, engine modifications, and the absolute limits of their machinery. It's where innovation happens, where the boundaries of what's possible get redrawn. Eric Medlen was a veteran of these sessions, as comfortable testing as he was competing. As his funny car launched down the quarter mile, everything seemed normal. The 8,000 horsepower engine roared to life, The rear slicks gripped the asphalt, and the car accelerated with that familiar rush of velocity. But somewhere down the strip, something catastrophic began to develop. A tire started to fail. But this wasn't an ordinary deflation. This was the most severe tire shake ever recorded in an NHRA funny car. As the tire deflated, it created an 18-inch movement up and down. With every rotation, that deflating tire exerted a force exceeding 40,000 pounds. The side-to-side shaking intensified, violent, and uncontrollable. The funny car bucked and heaved, a wild beast thrashing against its driver. Eric's head, despite the protective equipment he wore, began striking the roll bars surrounding the cockpit, not once, but repeatedly. Each impact was violent, each one adding cumulative damage to his brain and skull. The force was so severe, so relentless, that experts would later describe it as if Eric had been shaken to death by the violence of the machine. The impacts knocked Eric unconscious. Without a conscious driver to control the car, it veered offline and struck a concrete retaining wall. The impact was enormous, the destruction total. The funny car crumpled against the barrier like it had been crushed by a giant's hand. The NHRA Safety Safari, those trained emergency responders who stand ready at every race and test session, sprang into action. They cut Eric free from the twisted metal of the cockpit and began emergency treatment immediately at the track. Every second counted. Every decision made in those first minutes could mean the difference between life and death. Eric was transported by Alachua County Fire Rescue to Shands at the University of Florida Medical Center, where trauma surgeons were ready and waiting. The diagnosis was severe, a closed head injury of catastrophic proportions. On March 20, 2007, doctors performed a delicate 3-hour craniectomy, a surgical procedure to relieve mounting pressure and internal hemorrhaging within Eric's skull. Despite their expertise, despite their dedication, despite every advance in modern medicine, Eric was fighting an injury that the human body was simply not equipped to overcome. For 4 days, Eric Medlen clung to life in that Florida hospital. His father sat vigil. John Force waited and prayed. The racing community held its collective breath, hoping against hope that somehow, someway, this young man who had already overcome so much would pull through once more. But on March 23, 2007, in accordance with Eric's own pre-stated wishes, those conversations we all hope we never have to act upon, his family made the agonizing decision to remove life support. Eric John Medlen, 33 years old, died from complications of diffuse axonal injury. The injuries to his brainstem and neural networks were simply too severe for any human to survive. Eric became the first NHRA funny car driver ever to lose his life in competition. He was the first fatality in the professional drag racing ranks since 2004, when top fuel driver Darrell Russell was killed in a crash. The sport was devastated. The racing world mourned. And one man, a man who had already lost so much in his life, now faced a choice that would define his legacy. That man was John Medlen, Eric's father and crew chief. That man was also John Force, team owner and mentor, who had always called Eric the son I never had. Together, they made a decision born from grief and forged in determination. They would ensure that what happened to Eric Medlen would never happen to another driver again. They would take this tragedy and transform it into purpose. They would build something better. They would change an entire sport. John Force Racing immediately withdrew from competition. Instead of racing toward another championship, the team dedicated itself to investigation and innovation. What had killed Eric? What were the precise mechanisms of his injury? And most importantly, how could the sport of drag racing be fundamentally redesigned to prevent this from ever happening again? The answers led to the creation of the Eric Medlen Project, one of the most comprehensive safety research initiatives in motorsports history. Located in Brownsburg, Indiana, less than 10 miles from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the Eric Medlen Project was established with a singular mission: to enhance race car safety through advanced research and development. The first and most immediate change was something simple yet profound. Every funny car roll bar would now be padded. The roll bars are now encased in heavy foam rubber insulation and wrapped with 7 layers of Nomex fabric, that fire-resistant material that shields drivers from flames. The padding doesn't just cushion impacts, it distributes force more evenly, reducing the concentration of trauma to any single point of the head or neck. It's a change that sounds small, but for drivers like those who came after Eric, it would prove to be the difference between walking away and never walking at all. But the Eric Medlen Project was far more ambitious than padding alone. Led by John Medlen himself, the project became a beacon of innovation. Advanced head and neck restraint systems were developed, mechanisms designed to minimize the movement of a driver's head during violent impacts. 7-point safety harness systems were refined to keep drivers locked in place, reducing the whipping motion that causes so much damage during crashes. High-tech data acquisition devices were installed in every car, recording telemetry that would help engineers understand exactly what happens in a crash, what forces act upon a driver's body, and how those forces could be better managed. The project even explored the possibility of building funny cars with IndyCar-style monocoque chassis, single-piece carbon fiber and titanium shells designed to absorb and distribute impact energy far more effectively than traditional tube frame construction. The investment exceeded $4 million, with costs continuing to grow as new innovations were tested and implemented. For John Force, it was money spent without hesitation. "I have a picture of Vince Lombardi that says, 'Winning's everything,'" Force said. "So I've had to change. Winning is still important, but I never lost a man on my playing field and did it on purpose. It makes me think, what good is it to win if you're going to lose somebody else?" But the true test of these innovations came sooner than anyone expected. On September 23, 2007, exactly 6 months after Eric Medlen's death, John Force was competing in the NHRA O'Reilly Fall Nationals at the Texas Motorplex near Dallas. Force was racing in the semifinals against Kenny Bernstein, another legend of the sport. Down the quarter mile they went, 2 300-mile-per-hour missile launching down a 1,320-foot strip of asphalt that might as well have been the edge of the world at that speed. Bernstein's car drifted slightly into Force's lane, not enough for a direct collision, but enough to unsettle the aerodynamics of both machines. In the next instant, John Force's funny car experienced a catastrophic engine failure. 7,000 horsepower suddenly cut to zero. The car swerved uncontrollably, heading straight toward Bernstein's vehicle at over 300 miles per hour. The two machines collided with a force that defies comprehension. Force's car was struck so violently, so completely, that its chassis literally split in half. The cockpit separated from the front end of the vehicle. Wheels and engine components continued moving down the track, while what remained of the driver's compartment careened along the pavement. Assistant Force was waiting at the finish line after her own run had completed. "I started toward the pits, got on the radio, and it was the motor," she recalled of hearing the initial report. "My heart just dropped. I thought, where is Dad? I ran toward the edge and looked, and the part that was supposed to be in that car was not even there. Then I turned around and saw the race car there, and it was Dad's car. That's when I just stopped and had no idea where to go." When the safety safari reached the remains of Force's cockpit, they made a stunning discovery. John Force was alive. He was extracted from the wreckage with serious injuries, compound fractures to both legs, damage to both arms and hands, a lost fingertip, broken toes, and burns. But miraculously, there was no head trauma, no brain injury, no catastrophic injury to his skull or spine. When a race car splits in two from under a driver, it's truly a blessing that John is still with us, said Austin Coil, Force's longtime crew chief. Kenny Bernstein, who had been in the other car, looked at what was left of Force's funny car in absolute disbelief. "I've never seen a car break like that," he said. "I've seen crashes that are just terrible, but where it's still got the driver compartment, that's a bad one, as bad as they get. Had this accident happened 6 months earlier, John Force would likely have died on that Texas track." The improvements made by the Eric Medlen Project, the reinforced chassis, the enhanced roll cage design, the better head and neck protection, had saved his life. I'll tell you this. I'm glad I had the wreck, and I'm glad I crashed, Force reflected. Because if it's not me, it would have been the next guy. If it's not next, it's the one after that. Force spent 27 days in the hospital. Initially, doctors weren't certain he would ever walk again. Today, he moves with a discernible limp. 2 fingers remain numb from the tips to the knuckles. His right foot has 6 permanent screws implanted to keep his severely burned toes from falling off. He takes 10 different medications daily to manage pain. Yet at the end of January 2008, less than 4 months after his crash, John Force made his first test run down a drag strip since the accident. He reached 327 miles per hour, the exact speed he was traveling when he crashed in Texas. When he climbed out of the car, tears streamed down his face. He was back, not just to compete, but to testify to the power of the safety innovations that had been born from Eric Medlen's tragedy. The impact of Eric Medlen's death reverberated far beyond John Force Racing. The entire NHRA, recognizing the lessons learned, enacted new mandatory safety requirements for both funny car and top fuel divisions. Every team now had to comply with the new roll bar padding specifications. Head and neck restraint systems became standard. Driver compartments were redesigned for better protection. Track operators began examining their facilities. How much runoff area existed? What barriers were in place? How could they better protect drivers when things went wrong? Texas Motorplex owner Billy Meyer, himself a former racer who understood the risks, was inspired by the changes happening throughout drag racing. He consulted with John Force about expanding the safety features at his track. NHRA is aggressively working on safety improvements, Meyer said. But I've also been talking to Force about some of the things we can do to increase safety at the track. Force's team has been at the forefront of the quest to make the sport more safe. The safety improvements inspired by Eric Medlen's accident weren't limited to drag racing. Formula One teams, particularly the Williams team with whom John Force Racing partnered for research, studied the Eric Medlen Project's innovations. Formula 3 and Formula 2 racing programs incorporated lessons learned from the data gathered by the project. Motorsports safety organizations around the world recognized that the research happening in drag racing, arguably the most violent motorsport in the world, had implications for all forms of racing. The innovations continued to evolve. As speeds increased and technology advanced, the Eric Medlen Project remained at the cutting edge, always asking the next question: what else can we do? How can we make it safer? What did we miss? Partnerships with companies like Simpson Performance Products, a global leader in racing safety equipment, helped ensure that innovations were widely distributed and accessible to all competitors, not just the teams with the biggest budgets. Every year, Sonoma Raceway holds the Eric Medlen Ice Cream Social, a tribute to Medlen's love of ice cream and his fundamental belief that a person can never be unhappy when eating ice cream. The benefit helps local racers in the San Francisco Bay Area, supporting scholarship funds so that future generations of racers can pursue their dreams safely. It's a reminder that behind every championship, every victory, every spectacular run down a drag strip, there are people working not just to win, but to ensure that everyone, from the favorite son of a team to the young up-and-comer making their first pass, comes home safe. When you climb into a funny car today, you're climbing into a machine that has benefited from the research, the tears, the determination, and the unrelenting commitment to safety that Eric Medlen's tragedy inspired. The padding on those roll bars? That's Eric. The advanced helmet designs? That's Eric. The reinforced cockpit structures? That's Eric. The telemetry systems that record every impact, that help engineers understand what happens during a crash so they can build something better? That's Eric, too. On March 19, 2007, drag racing lost a rising star. The sport lost a promising young driver at the height of his potential. A father lost his son. A team lost a beloved member of its extended family. John Force lost the son he never had. But what emerged from that tragedy, what has been built upon the foundation of Eric Medlen's sacrifice, has saved lives, not just in drag racing, but in motorsports around the world. The accident that happened at Gainesville Raceway on that March day revolutionized drag racing, not because of what it destroyed, but because of what it inspired. It inspired a father to fight with every resource at his disposal to ensure no other father would suffer his loss. It inspired a team owner to transform grief into purpose. It inspired an entire sport to demand better, to build better, to never settle for anything less than the best possible safety standards. Eric Medlen never intended to change the world. He just wanted to race. But in the way he lived, with determination, with passion, with the willingness to push beyond limits, and in the way his loss moved those who loved him, he did exactly that. The Eric Medlen Project continues today, a permanent legacy in Brownsburg, Indiana, a monument to one man's contribution to making motorsports safer. Every driver who gets into a funny car with better protection, every racer who walks away from a crash they shouldn't have survived, every family that still has their loved one because of innovations developed in Eric's name, they are all part of his legacy. This is how revolutions happen in motorsports, not through sweeping mandates or bureaucratic decree, but through the determination of people who love racing so much that they demand it be better, safer, and more respectful of the lives that are at stake every time someone pushes into that throttle. Eric Medlen's accident revolutionized drag racing because it transformed a tragedy into purpose, and because those who loved him refused to let his death be in vain. That is the true legacy of the accident that revolutionized drag racing.